Joining us today from the center are Dr. Meg Iyer, who is a special education transition specialist, Elaine Marcinek, principal investigator and director, and Jay Shepard, director of digital content and accessibility. With that, I turn it over to the team from the Center for Change in Transition Services.
Thank you so much. I'm just working on sharing my screen here. Awesome. And thanks for that great introduction. So hello, I am Meg Iyer from the Center for Change and Transition Services. And as we were introduced, we're Washington State's Technical Assistance Center for Secondary Transition Planning and also post-school outcome data. And then I just wanted to mention we do have Elaine Marcinek here, who was just introduced. She is going to be monitoring the chat for us, and then Jay Shepard and I will both be presenting. Today, we'll start with an overview of who we are at CCTS and the work that we do, and that will lead us into some foundational information about individual education program, or IEP, transition planning. And then we'll focus on one of the tools that we have available to support transition planning called the T-Folio curriculum. We'll explore that curriculum a bit, and then we'll have time at the end for any questions that we didn't get to during the presentation. But please feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go. So first, to start out, a brief overview of who we are at the Center for Change in Transition Services. So at CCTS, we work to empower educators to improve transition services for students with disabilities. We do that through our partnerships, research, and training. We're funded by the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, which we often refer to as OSPI, as part of the Inclusionary Practices Technical Assistance Network, IPTN. We're located at Seattle University in the College of Education. And we are part of a statewide Inclusionary Practices Technical Assistance Network, which provides guidance, technical assistance, and professional development resources to districts in Washington State. The aim of our network is to improve student outcomes and increase inclusion with a focus on students currently in the least restrictive environment 3, which is students that spend 39% or less of their school day in general education setting, and then also Black students with disabilities. CCTS provides secondary transition training and technical assistance to Washington State partnering agencies and public schools that serve high school age students. We're also responsible for managing and reviewing the district reported post-school outcome data. We submit the data to OSPI at the state level to be included in the state's annual performance report, and we make that data available to districts, counties, and ESDs to use for program improvement. All of the resources and materials that we generate are available through our website, and they're designed for educators, administrators, agency staff, youth with disabilities, and their family and caregivers. We do not provide direct services such as student transition assessments or attend IEP meetings. So let's turn and talk a little bit about IEP transition planning. So in the year that a student turns 16 or earlier, if the IEP team decides, it's required by state and federal law that transition services are included in their IEP. This intentional flow starts with age-appropriate transition assessments, and the results of these assessments inform all the activities that follow, which are writing measurable post-secondary goals, identifying transition services, writing the course of study and annual goals, and coordinating with adult service agencies. These activities create a viable IEP that is designed by and for the student. The transition component becomes a framework for the rest of the IEP so that the student can make a successful transition to post-secondary living. The IEP is, of course, revisited and adjusted at each annual meeting based on new data and present levels of performance. So now in this next slide, we see those transition components assembled into a flow chart. It includes several subcomponents that have been added to the first three sections of the sequence. So in conducting the age-appropriate transition assessments, the purpose is to help students identify their strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. And then under writing measurable post-secondary goals, there needs to be goals written in the areas of education and training, and then also in employment. And then if it's considered necessary by the IEP team, a goal in independent living. In the area of identifying transition services, especially design instruction, any necessary related services, as well as community experiences and employment and living skills need to be addressed to support the progress toward reaching the student's post-secondary goals. Then the next step is developing a course of study for the student that includes not only the actual courses that need to be completed in order for them to graduate, but also courses that lead to their post-school goals. The course of study also includes coordinated experiences in school and the community that enhance the student's learning. And then next, the annual goals are written that connect to the post-secondary goals and lead to the student to achieving those goals. And then finally is the identification, coordination, and planning for agency connections to support the student as they leave the school system. Now, all of the training and technical assistance we provide is informed by the relationship among the 4 performance indicators that relate to secondary transition under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. There are 17 total IDEA indicators, 4 of which relate to secondary transition. So research shows that quality IEPs, which is indicator B13, lead to more students staying in school, which is indicator B2. That leads to higher graduation rates, indicator B1, which is linked to positive post-school outcomes for students after they leave high school, which is indicator B14, as shown here in this arrow. And so our training and technical assistance focus on B13 and B14, quality IEPs, and post-school outcomes. To support quality IEPs, we have a series of training modules that are all free and self-paced, and you can find them all on our website. So just to highlight a few, our Transition Foundation series includes writing effective transition plans, student-led IEP meetings, and developing job shadow experiences. The Partnerships for Inclusion, Special Education, and Career Technical Education training features interviews with Washington State educators who share their stories and strategies for increasing inclusionary practices in their schools and districts by emphasizing the collaboration between special education and CTE. We've just added a new module to our training that focuses on the meaningful inclusion of students with intellectual and developmental disabilities in CTE classes, career and tech education courses. So now I am going to hand it over to Jay.
Thanks, Meg. Hi, this is Jay Shepard here. Thanks again for inviting us to be here today. So Meg just showed that arrow that showed that interrelationship of all those indicators where ultimately quality IEPs lead to positive post-school outcomes. And Meg mentioned this, that a foundation of our work is also post-school outcome data, which is collected annually in Washington State through the post-school survey. Every state is required to report on their post-school outcomes for their former special education students, but states have different ways of gathering that data. In Washington State, we do a census survey every year where every school district makes phone calls to all of their former special education students 1 year after they permanently exited high school. And we refer to those former special education students as leavers because they're leavers because they permanently exited, meaning that they either aged out, dropped out, or graduated. Yes, it is amazing. It's so much work, and our districts do it every year. And because they take that time and the energy, we get really quality data, which I'll just show you a glimpse of in a moment. But those former students are asked a series of questions about their education and their employment activities in the first year after they exited school. And then based off of their survey responses, they're categorized as either engaged or not engaged. And if they're engaged, that means they have participated, they've met the reporting requirements for participation in higher education, competitive employment, other education, or other employment. And at CCTS, we provide technical assistance to districts as they conduct the survey, and then we create final reports of all the data, and we share them with districts and counties and ESDs to use for program improvement. I see a question about, it's a question to the chat, wondering if others here know if their states do the same. All states are gathering this data in some ways. So yeah, if you know how your state is collecting this data, please share in the chat. I'll give you just a glimpse of our data just so you kind of have an idea of what we look at. So this slide is showing two tables with our most current data. We will have new data available in January from the students who left in the 2022-23 academic year. So right now we're looking at the total of number of leavers in Washington State from the 2021-22 school year. And then it's showing us the total number of leavers who responded to the survey. So we had about 8,300 leavers and then about 6,500 respondents, which gives us a response rate of almost 78%, which we're really proud of. And again, we give all credit to our school districts and educators who are making these calls. The table below displays the percentage of statewide respondents who met those reporting requirements for each of those 5 post-school outcomes. And those 5 post-school outcomes are nationally determined. This isn't something we just made up. And again, that's higher education, competitive employment, other education, other employment, and no engagement. So with this data that we have, competitive employment was the highest outcome at almost 41%, followed by no engagement at 27%. And of course, we would prefer to see that no engagement number as low as possible. Then we have higher education at about 17%, other employment at almost 11%, and then other education at almost 4%. So again, we are in the process of wrapping up the 2024 survey, and new data will be available for our state in mid to late January. And as part of our work with the Inclusionary Practices Technical Assistance Network that Meg mentioned, this year we're especially interested in comparing these data with the least restrictive environment data for the state to see what information that gives us. And again, every state reports on this differently, so we encourage you to see if you can find the data that's available in your state and see how that information can influence your practices. I do see that some questions have come up in the chat. Elaine, is there anything we should check in about now?
Yeah, I was just ferociously typing up a message.
Yeah,
So I was just typing up, I'll just delete my type and just answer. So the engagement outcomes that you see here for competitive employment, higher education, and other employment, these are all federally defined outcomes. So these are the ones that we are required to report on. But just because a student doesn't meet one of these requirements doesn't mean that the student is not engaged in something. So it could mean that the student is working, but they just didn't work 90 days in that year that they were gone. Or maybe they weren't making minimum wage. Maybe they were making sub minimum wage because they, had a special circumstance. Or maybe they were going to some sort of higher education, but they didn't complete a term yet. They have just started going to higher education. So in Washington State, we also ask some qualitative questions depending on how the student answers the survey, so that we can just gather a little bit more information about these students to see why they might not be falling into some of these categories. So we count those kind of as other indicators of success, that these students are not just sitting at home doing nothing. But unfortunately, in terms of federal reporting, they would not be considered engaged, but we would be talking about those students with the districts as we're going through their data, as things that those districts can be looking at as measures of success in ways in which they can work on program improvement with those students. And in terms of if our higher ed percentage is higher than most states, I I don't know. I think it's probably lower. Our higher education percentage has actually taken a dip, and our competitive employment has increased, looking at the last few years.
Thanks, Elaine. And I'll also just add, I love the question, Sarah, about other indicators of success. And we do try to be really careful when we talk about these data and we use these outcomes. And I heard Elaine do it just now. When we talk about the students, we talk about meeting reporting requirements. We don't just say these students were not engaged. We say they did not meet the reporting requirements to be considered engaged, right? And those reporting requirements are specific. And so Elaine, highlighted some of the parameters, some of those criteria. And what we really encourage districts to do once they have these numbers is to go in and look at the individual survey results for the former students in their area and really dive into the data. And that's what we do a lot of our training on, is really, okay, we've got these numbers, but what else can we find? This isn't just, this is just data. None of this is good or bad. It's just data. Now, what do we do with it? What else can it tell us? And these are great questions. Just to move on, but if you have more questions about post-school outcome data towards the end, we'd love to chat more about that. But in terms of training resources that we have, I mentioned we do training on post-school outcome data. This slide includes a few additional resources that we have on our website that can support transition. This includes all of these are free. It includes T-Folio, which we are going to spend some time talking about today. It also includes the Indicator B13 review tool, which is a Excel workbook that helps ensure your IEPs are in alignment with those Indicator B13 requirements. So it's a self-review checklist. And then the quality indicators for secondary transition, or the QUIST, is another self-assessment tool, but this can be used at the building level or the district level to evaluate your transition services on a larger scale. So Elaine dropped a link into the chat as well. And if there aren't any more questions, we'll dive into T-Folio. So I think we covered some of those post-school outcome questions. But let's talk about T-Folio, and then we'll come back if there's more questions about post-school outcome data. Elaine just put a link in the chat to our website where we have a really nice overview of the T-Folio curriculum. So you're welcome to follow along as we talk about that today. We will ask you to take a look at some of the curriculum today, but let's highlight a few key points and just kind of get you familiar with the tool. The T-Folio is a free digital curriculum, and it's designed to help youth explore, identify, and plan for their post-school goals. It's intended to be used by students and young adults with the support of a facilitator, like a teacher or agency representative or even a family member. And with that facilitator guidance, students can work through activities that result in artifacts or products that they can use to build their transition portfolios. And a few examples of those artifacts are surveys and self-assessments like the Career Interest Survey. There's also a post-secondary goals worksheet and a resume builder. So these all come from activities that are grounded in evidence-based research and practices, which are all referenced within each lesson. And the T-Folio aligns with the IEP transition planning sequence that Meg discussed earlier, right? That flow chart. It also aligns with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation's pre-employment transition services. So you might have heard of DVR's pre-ETS, and Elaine is dropping a chat a link in the chat to the pre-ETS guidelines. And then also it aligns with the High School and Beyond Plan, which is a graduation requirement for all students here in Washington State. So since schools and counselors are already required to provide transition services, and again, the High School Beyond Plan in Washington State, the T-Folio is designed to be a supplemental tool for anyone who's working with youth on their transition goals. It's organized into 6 sections. It starts with a student-centered introduction, and then there are 5 content units, one on job exploration groundwork, post-secondary employment and education options, work-based learning experiences, workplace readiness training, and self-advocacy. And each unit includes a series of lessons for a total of 36 lessons. And Meg will talk about this, but the units and lessons can be used in a sequential order, starting with the introduction and going all the way to the end to self-advocacy, or you can use the content, you can kind of pick and choose the content, and a lot of those lessons will stand alone. But a typical lesson will include a lesson guide, which is designed for the facilitator. And then there's a PowerPoint slide deck or a PDF that supports the lesson, and you can edit any of that as you see fit. It's all designed to be used by you. And then there's at least one activity in each lesson that's intended to be completed online and then saved as a PDF or printed and completed by hand, depending on the preferences of the student and the facilitator. And I see a request in the chat to provide all of these links in one document. After we're done with this presentation, our hosts will send you an email with a copy of this slide deck. So you'll have all of these links in the slide deck for you. And now I'll hand it back over to Meg to talk about how to use the T-Folio.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Jay. So the T-Folio is designed for youth age 16 to 25 who are in the process of transitioning from high school to post-secondary employment or education. And it was designed primarily for users with specific learning disabilities and emotional behavioral disabilities. However, the activities are constructed to incorporate universal design principles and can be used by anyone making the transition to life beyond high school. We do recommend that facilitators consider the student they are working with and accommodate or modify accordingly. And the lesson guides embedded in the curriculum include suggestions for different presentation or response formats, depending on the needs of the youth. So another way that you can adapt the curriculum to meet the needs of students you're working with is by choosing which units or lessons to use. For example, if you're working with a middle or high school student, you may utilize each unit and lesson from the introduction through Unit 5. However, with a young adult who has some past work experience, you might choose to skip some of the content and only use specific units or lessons that are applicable to them. So that's what we mean by choice by design. You're selecting and choosing from the curriculum to meet the needs of the person you're working with. And we also recommend integrating the T-Folio activities into required coursework. So it's not something extra that you're trying to fit into the day. T-Folio curriculum should be working to support the learning goals that you already have in place for your students. So when implementing these lessons, it may make sense to partner with other educators or school staff, agency representatives like DVR counselors, or other guest speakers from the community. And the activities can be done with a group or working with individual students. One of the potential current challenges of the T-Folio is that there isn't currently a way to save your work within the platform. So for that reason, we recommend planning activities so that they can be completed in a single session to avoid any work being lost. And then once an activity is completed, it can be printed out or it can be saved as a PDF to your local computer. And depending on the student, they may prefer to have the activities printed out ahead of time rather than completing them on the computer. So there's also an option to print them out and then have students complete them by hand or have someone help them complete them. So now what we're going to do, we'd like to give you some time to explore T-Folio for a little bit. We ask that you pick a unit that you're interested in exploring and then just select one lesson within that unit, maybe two if you have a little bit more time. We're going to have you go into breakout groups for this and give you about 10 minutes there so you can explore the content. And then within that small group, discuss your observations. So take a little bit of time on your own to independently explore and then talk with your group. We have put some questions here in the slide for discussion. And when we come back together, if you could have one group member share a highlight from the conversation, we would love to engage a little bit in discussion with you as well. Any questions before you go to the rooms? It looks like they're just starting to open, so you can head there or let us know if you have any questions.
Okay, breakout rooms are closed, so everyone should be back with us.
All right, awesome. Welcome back, everybody. So we know that was just a little bit of time to take a look at a lesson or two in T-Folio, and we hope that you got some time to discuss as a group. We'd love to have a couple people share out, or at least one person from each group, if possible, if anyone's willing. You can either write it in the chat if you don't want to come off, unmute your microphone, or please feel free to unmute and jump in and share with us either a key takeaway or a lesson that you found would be helpful, or maybe a way that you, if you work in a classroom or have a student, how you would use this.
What about our group one representatives? Looks like Antoinette, Marissa, Tina, and Valerie. Does anyone from that group want to jump in?
I really like the lessons and the fact that it comes with, each one of them comes with a PowerPoint. I think about the students I currently have, and I would really have to modify and really walk them through. So it might take longer than a day. It might take longer than I anticipated, just because I know how low functioning some of those students are. I don't say that to be dismissive of their abilities. I just know what their capabilities are. So I'm a little concerned about that, but I think there are places for it to be used, most definitely.
And Tina, thank you for mentioning that. One of the things that we're currently thinking about and actually looking for grants and funding for is to be able to adapt the lessons
Okay.
so that we could do like some universal design for learning. We actually have a plan laid out.
Okay.
But as an education, right, it's just like looking to get that funding so that we're able to do the work. But to be able to diversify the instruction more for students that have more significant disabilities. So that's I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's definitely something that we're aware of and some work that we're really wanting to get to do.
Well, I really appreciate your hard work and the fact that you're making those considerations. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
What about our room three folks, Brenda, Danielle, Dawn, and Whitney?
Good afternoon, everybody. So I was just reviewing the resources, and I feel like this, in terms of differentiating, you could give some resources to the counselors that are working with the students on post-secondary, and also in terms of for families, having them be able to extend some of these conversations at home so that they can really talk about their child's strengths and where they might want to go career-wise.
Yeah, I love that, Dawn, especially bringing in, others on the IEP team and others on the school team, remembering that all students are general education students first. And so getting those counselors to help with it too. In Washington State, we have a high school and beyond plan that's for all students. And the T-Folio curriculum really, really works in tandem with that as we're braiding together the high school and beyond plan and the IEP transition plan.
Awesome. I'll call on our room four friends, Eugene, Jennifer, Lisa.
Hi, good afternoon. Eugene, I'm in the state of Maryland, and we actually are required under our Code of Maryland regulation to begin transition planning at age 14 or 13 if the IEP, if they're going to turn 14 in the year the IEP. So I'm really interested, kind of like the last person. How can we possibly look at getting this started in the middle school band? Because oftentimes I think we all know, by the time, if we wait until 15 or 16, it's too late. And we're really making a push in Maryland, particularly I'm in Baltimore City, on how we can begin that in transition planning earlier. So like the other person, how we can modify, possibly implement some UDL principles to get our middle schoolers on board. I like what the last person said, as well as engaging our families. And if we could possibly, and again, I know it's all about funding, how we can engage them via cell phone technology through an app, that so they can access this through an app on their phone somehow. Because again, a lot of our kids, wow, the digital divide has closed, but a lot of them are getting their information and engagement through cell phone technology. So if we can somehow, even look to get some funding to develop this on an app.
Yeah, I love that idea. And Lauren pointed out in the chat that it used to be age 14 nationally that transition had to start, and it does vary by state. And even though in Washington State it is 16, I am a school psychologist and I worked at both high school and middle school. And I, after working at high school and moving to a middle school, I actually started it with students in my school just because, as you said, Eugene, by the time they get to high school, they're not, sometimes 15 and 16-year-olds aren't as engaged or listening to the adults in their lives as the middle schoolers will. So it's nice to get them started. And I also found when they start thinking about their future more in post high school in middle school, then when they get into high school, they are thinking about like career electives to take, or they're thinking about the course of the sequence of courses in order to go to like the college or post education that they want to go to, and they take high school a little more seriously if they're thinking about this transition at the middle school level. So thank you for sharing that. Yes, or Lauren points out, or they have left school. So yeah, engaging students early is really important.
But I like the fact as well, like she said, she engages the school counselors. And again, I know prevailing perception in my school district is that they aren't their kids. They have the IEP chair, the ITA. So really engaging school professional counselors or guidance counselors, into the post-secondary transition process is also essential.
Yeah, I think that's a battle we fight like across all the states. And just constantly reminding all school staff that all students are gen ed students first.
Meg, I just wanted to add to something that you said about the middle school and what Eugene's point was about that a lot of our students also, some of the data that you mentioned, you were talking about post-school data, but there are students who start in 15, 16, starting to get jobs and get some of those pieces. So, trying to get them to think about what their post-school life is going to be might help them inform the kind of paid internship, volunteer, whatever jobs that they start having during or after school hours, depending on who they are and what their schedules allow for. So I just wanted to recognize that idea of starting some of these processes in middle school helps our students, not only in post-school, but even in high school, to help them start to get started, to basically get started for post-school life.
Yes, good point. And when we talk about like the course of study, like that's so important too for students. Like it's not just the classes, it's also those community experiences, internships, jobs. Like what do they need? What experiences do they need to be having before they move on from their K through 12, or to some students up to age 22 education, so that they have more knowledge about what they might want to be doing after.
These are great conversations. We still have a little bit of time. I'd love to try and get our last two more observations in from our last two groups. What about our room 5 folks, Marcia, Marilyn, and two Sarahs? Anyone from that group want to share?
Well, in complete transparency, we didn't talk about T-Folio because I took over the session as a person who is new to this work and new to secondary, to ask a lot of questions to those more seasoned folks that I had the opportunity to talk with. And so I just appreciated the chance to hear from people who have a deeper knowledge of this stuff and how they do it on the East Coast compared to here in Washington, as I wrap my head around all of this and figure out where to start to make improvements in my district. So thank you.
Fantastic. Time well used. Wonderful. Making connections. That's great. That's great. And then what about our last group? It looks like I was supposed to be in that group. I'm sorry I didn't join you. Stephanie, was there anything from that group that was worth highlighting?
Yes, we were able to talk about the layout with that there PowerPoints are there, that there's worksheets, there's materials. I do like that in lesson 5, I think it's in unit 1, there's a self-determination scale. I've used that and it's really helpful. And then there's also a tracker that helps you keep track of lessons. And so that's one way you could use it to help keep you on track. And then it gives you an overview of all of the lessons, which is great for planning.
Yay, it sounds like really good conversations were had. Everyone gets gold stars. And thank you for sharing. Really, really enjoyed hearing everyone's thoughts. Meg, are you ready to wrap us up here?
Yeah. I was just going to mention, so one of our big goals for T-Folio is hopefully to create a database so that students could save their work in that. But just wanted to share that that's something that we're hoping to do in the future. As we're wrapping up, it looks like we just have a few minutes left. So if anybody has questions, you can let us know or put those in the chat. Please remember that our website is available with these free resources. And there is our email if you would like to get in touch with us. It's just ccts@seattleu.edu. We, Jay, Elaine, and I all have access to that. And then we put out a quarterly newsletter. We just had one go out this week, but we would love it if you would subscribe to our newsletter. We just give some information on transition and some thoughtful tidbits once a quarter. And then if there are any questions, we'll stay on and see if anybody has any questions for us.